Virgin, this divine revelation bears your name. Have you ever been suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be entirely yours alone? Someone told you a phrase, a piece of advice, a message, and the first thing you thought wasn't, "That's beautiful." It was, "That would work for anyone." You stored it away in a mental drawer of generic things, things that don't truly have your name written on them. But there's a problem. What if your skepticism wasn't intelligence, but a way of protecting yourself from feeling that something divine can, in fact, be tailor-made for you? Virgos are born with a trained eye for finding flaws before beauty. This isn't a flaw, it's survival. At some point you learned that if you saw the pattern before everyone else, you wouldn't be caught off guard again. And it worked. But that same eye became a silent prison when it comes to accepting that something good can be real, specific, and yours. Imagine a geologist standing before a rock. To someone rushing by, it's just grey stone, but the geologist sees layers. Each band of color represents a period that hasn't repeated itself before or since in that exact way. The rock isn't generic, it's a signature. That's how a divine revelation reaches Virgo. It looks like any old stone until someone learns to look at the layers. You know that moment, that phrase that came back to your head 3 times in the same day for no apparent reason. That number that appeared in a way that couldn't be called a coincidence without stretching it. You saw it, felt it, and tried to explain it rationally, because admitting that it had your name written on it meant admitting that you are seen by something bigger than you can control. And for Virgo, being seen without being able to analyze what is being seen is almost unbearable. There's a piano tuner who spends his life listening to the difference between an almost right note and a right note. For most people, the two sound the same. For the tuner, the difference is physical, a vibration that disturbs the body. Virgo listens to life like that. He hears the difference between generic advice and a truth tuned to his story. And when that right note appears, it doesn't sound like luck. It sounds as if someone had adjusted the string, knowing the sound his soul needed to hear. But then comes the question you avoid asking. If this message really has your name on it, what exactly is it asking you to do with it right now? There's a scene you may have witnessed without fully understanding its magnitude. A beekeeper working inside a swarm without gloves, calm, while thousands of bees pass within centimeters of his face. Outsiders think it's crazy, but the swarm recognizes his scent, the way he moves. It's not luck that he hasn't been stung. It's mutual recognition, built in silence, gesture by gesture, year after year. Virgo also builds this recognition with the invisible, but rarely trusts it. You sense when something is meant for you before any proof appears, and instead of trusting this instinct, you ask for a more obvious sign because a part of you still believes that trusting freely is for naive people, and you never wanted to be naive. You wanted to be precise. And this is where the knife sharpener lives. He doesn't sharpen the blade to keep it in a drawer. He sharpens it to use it. A sharpened knife that never cuts anything rusts faster than an ordinary knife. Virgo spent his life sharpening his discernment, the ability to perceive what has real purpose. But discernment never used to decide becomes the opposite. Instead of protection, it becomes paralysis disguised as caution. And it is precisely when this sharp blade encounters something too large to cut on its own, something too big to cut through alone with the blade of discernment. Because there's a difference between perceiving that something has a purpose and knowing in practice what to do with that perception after it has passed through you. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The Divine Path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose doesn't come across as just another list of generic advice. It was designed precisely for this blind spot of Virgo, the moment when discernment has already understood that something real is happening, but still doesn't know how to transform that clarity into direction. It's less a book about predictions and more a training in mental posture, a way to stop sharpening the blade eternally and use it to cut what needs cutting without getting lost in the pursuit of a perfection that never arrives. You're exactly in that in-between place right now, still processing what you just heard, feeling your own body recognize something even before your mind accepts it. This lingering discomfort isn't a sign to wait a little longer. It's a sign that clarity is already knocking on the door, asking you to open it now while it's still alive within you. The link is in the first pinned comment, but be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And in the meantime, tell me in the comments, when was the last time you felt such a specific message that it bothered you, and what did you do about that discomfort? There's a type of diver who descends without a cylinder, without supplemental air, relying solely on their own breath held in their chest. This is called freediving. And what's most impressive about those who do it professionally isn't their courage, but the opposite, their calmness. Because underwater, in apnea, any panic consumes oxygen faster and kills you before you reach the depth you intended. The number one rule has never been to fight the water pressure. It's about learning to relax within it, letting your body trust that the pressure isn't a threat. It's just the price of being deeper. Those who train this way say something curious. The real limit is almost never the lungs, it's the mind. The body can endure much more than the mind allows. And the real work of those who dive this way isn't strengthening the chest. It's disarming the mental alarm that goes off too early, before the time is right, screaming that it's no longer possible to continue when in reality it still is, and very much so. There's even a technical name for this first urge to breathe. It arrives well before the body's real limit. It's just a conservative warning, a safety system programmed to err on the side of caution. Those who learn to distinguish this first warning from the true limit can go much deeper than they ever imagined possible. Virgos spend their entire lives in emotional apnea. They hold their breath even before they need to, conserve air in advance, control every muscle in their body and mind, because at some point they learned that panicking underwater is the end of everything. And it worked for a long time. But there's an emotional depth that no amount of control can solve on its own. There comes a point where either you trust that there's a surface waiting for you to return to, or control itself becomes exactly what's drowning you from the inside. You felt it before, even without quite naming what it was. That moment when holding on a little longer stopped being about strength and became suffocation disguised as resistance, as managing. That urge to surface, to ask for help, to simply breathe, which you stifled because you thought you didn't yet have the right to need air like everyone else. And it's precisely at that exact point, on the boundary between the breath you still have left and the panic that threatens to arrive too soon, that the revelation that bears your name manifests itself, not as another demand to endure a little longer underwater, but as the right oxygen at the right time that you needed to surface whole, without giving up halfway and without drowning out of pride. That feeling of needing air, of holding on to more than anyone should be able to hold on alone, is the perfect reason to stop now and look at the divine path that guides your zodiac sign towards a life of purpose, as what Virgo has always needed. Not more control, but direction to know the right time to let go and rise. It exists precisely for those who have already understood that holding everything on alone has its limits, and that there is a huge difference between true resilience and stubbornness disguised as strength. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. A bridge engineer doesn't design a rigid structure, he designs it to sway. Every large bridge in the world has a calculated margin of flex, a mathematical space to yield a few centimeters without breaking, because a perfectly rigid bridge cracks in the first strong wind. and a bridge that knows how to move, withstands decades of storms without a single visible crack. The secret was never to resist without ever moving. It was to calculate exactly how much it moved without collapsing. There's a detail that few people know about these structures. The higher and longer the bridge, the greater this flexibility margin needs to be. An engineer who ignores this and builds thinking only about brute force is actually building a more fragile bridge, not a stronger one. Rigidity without flexibility is not resistance. It's fragility disguised as solidity. There's a famous bridge that stood for decades, visibly swaying in strong winds, undulating before the frightened eyes of those crossing it. And it was precisely this calculated sway, not the absence of it, that prevented its collapse. Virgo builds bridges like this her whole life, silently, without an inauguration plaque, without anyone applauding each span overcome. Between what she feels and what she shows to others, between what she truly wants and what she thinks is reasonable to ask for without bothering anyone, between the version of herself that makes mistakes and stumbles like any human being, and the version that needs to always seem reliable, always in control, always one step ahead of any problem. And she lives terrified by the idea that yielding even a single centimeter is the same as collapsing completely, that any sign of fragility will bring down the entire structure that took years to build. But no structure survives without room for flexibility, not even the most meticulously designed bridge in the world, not even you. And it is precisely at this point that Virgo's most unsettling paradox lies. The same demand for perfection that builds such solid bridges is what prevents these bridges from lasting, because a structure that can never yield, eventually, under sufficient pressure, does not bend. It breaks all at once, without warning, after years of silently enduring. The revelation that bears your name isn't asking you to become more rigid, stronger, more controlled, or more flawless than you already are. It's asking for the courage to finally calculate how much flexibility you can allow yourself without crumbling, because it's precisely there, in that space between rigidity and brittleness, that the difference lies between resisting forever out of fear and truly enduring with lightness. If you recognize this pattern of holding everything too tightly until it cracks inside without anyone noticing on the outside, the divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose was built with that exact moment in mind, the instant when Virgo understands that yielding intelligently isn't weakness, it's well-calculated emotional engineering. It helps you see where to introduce flexibility without losing the structure that sustains you, without becoming an unrecognizable person in the process. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. A cave explorer always carries a thread attached to the entrance. It's not a luxury, it's survival. Inside, in absolute darkness, every corridor seems the same as the last. Every decision seems arbitrary. And without that thread guiding you back, it's easy to walk in circles for hours thinking you're making progress, when in reality, you're just repeating the same section of gallery disguised as a new one. The thread doesn't prevent exploration. It ensures there's a way back for those who venture too deep into the unknown. There's something experienced explorers say about the fear of going deep into a cave. The real danger is almost never what's inside. It's the silent and mistaken certainty that you can rely solely on your own memory to find your way back. The darkness deceives even those with the best sense of direction in the world, because underground there is no sun, no horizon, no external reference to help you know if you're going forward or backward. There are accounts from experienced explorers who spent hours convinced they were advancing in a straight line, when in reality they were slowly circling the same point, guided by a directional instinct that, without any light, simply ceases to function properly. Virgo delves deep into everything, into their own thoughts, their own old guilts, their own tireless attempts to rationally understand why they feel what they feel, ruminating on every detail until exhaustion. And they rarely tie up a thread before descending. They go in alone, in the dark, convinced that their own sharp logic will find their way back, because it always has before, in simpler, shallower situations. But there's an emotional depth where logic alone is no longer enough. There, without a wire, without external reference, you can spend months, even years, going in circles inside your own head, revisiting the same wounds with different names, thinking you're evolving just because you're moving, without realizing that that movement is circular. It's not progress at all. The message that bears your name doesn't ask you to stop exploring your own inner caves, much less to stay at the entrance for fear of the dark. It asks you to finally tie a thread before entering, because knowing your own deepest corridors without any guaranteed way back isn't courage. It's unnecessary risk disguised as self-knowledge. If that image of walking in circles in the dark hurt in a strangely familiar way, it's because perhaps you've been there longer than you'd like to admit. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose works exactly like that thread. It doesn't prevent you from diving deep into the self-knowledge that Virgo so desperately seeks and needs, but it ensures there's always a clear direction back to the surface, to real life, to concrete action. It exists for those who have already dug too deep alone and know deep down that they need more than just instinct to return enlightened instead of more lost. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. A conductor doesn't play any instrument during a concert. He doesn't hold a violin, doesn't blow brass instruments, doesn't pluck a double bass string. And yet, without him, the entire orchestra crumbles into noise, each musician playing technically correctly, but without any cohesive meaning. What he does is more subtle and more essential than any single note played perfectly. He listens to the whole. He knows exactly when the silence needs to last a second longer before the violins enter, when the percussion needs to recede to let the oboe breathe alone for a moment, when each separate part, rehearsed individually for months, finally becomes one living thing greater than the sum of its parts. There's a curious scene that happens during rehearsals, before the actual show. Each musician alone thinks they're playing well. And they are. But it's only when the conductor raises his baton and leads the meeting of all those parts that the music truly comes to life. Before that, there were only competent fragments without a common soul. Virgo was always trained, from a young age, to play her own instrument with isolated perfection, every note correct, every detail tuned before anyone notices the mistake, every phrase revised 2-3 times before leaving her mouth. And for a long time, that seemed enough. But the revelation that carried her name throughout this journey was never about playing yet another flawless note alone, isolated, perfect, and solitary. It was about finally accepting the place of someone who also knows how to listen to the whole ensemble, recognizing that there is a greater intelligence guiding the right timing of each entrance, each necessary silence, each crescendo that cannot be rushed. Perhaps this is the hardest part to accept for someone who has spent their entire life demanding so much of themselves without a break, without pause. That conducting is happening even when you're not holding the baton. That the silence you fear so much, that empty space between one attempt and another, between a request made and an answer that hasn't yet come, isn't an absence of music. It's part of the score. You no longer need to prove you know how to play. You already know and always have known, long before any external proof confirmed it. What remains, after everything said here, is the most silent and beautiful invitation that exists for someone who bears your name, to trust that there is a guiding force at play beyond what your trained eyes can calculate on their own, beyond what any analysis, however precise, can predict. That the divine, in the specific way it chose to speak to you, through signs that only make sense to those who know how to look at the right layers, always knew the exact moment to raise the baton. And that perhaps the greatest proof of a Virgo's genius has never been controlling every measure of their own life, but finally allowing the music, guided by something greater than their own discernment, to play through them, with them, and not despite them. The next time the silence seems too long between a request made to the universe and the answer that hasn't yet arrived, perhaps it's worth remembering the conductor standing still, baton suspended in the air, waiting for the right moment, knowing, with a calmness that no musician in the orchestra can feel alone, that the next entrance comes exactly when it needs to come.